Hello everyone, welcome to this new episode where we are going to understand India's economic history. The recent history though. This week we have seen Finance Minister has presented white paper on the Indian economy which talked about how UPA government, which was from 2004 to 2014, destroyed India's economy and how Narendra Modi led BJP or NDA government improved thereafter. So there has been a lot of noise and chatter about this white paper. But before introducing this white paper, Congress introduced something called as black paper. Was titled as 10 Saal Anyay Kal. Basically, it talks about how in the last 10 years things have worsened. So, what is the truth? Has the Indian economy really improved in the last 10 years? And everyone wants to know the verdict. Everyone wants to understand how things have changed in the last 10 years compared to the previous 10 years. So in this video, I'm going to understand this along with you. And obviously, if I'm making a video, I cannot make it without an Excel sheet. Here's my Excel sheet. In this Excel sheet, I have analyzed a lot of different indicators around India's economy. Let us first of all go through what the white paper talks about. So it begins with this particular sentence, which is in 2014, when we formed the government, the economy was in a fragile state. Public finances were in bad shape. There was economic mismanagement and financial indiscipline, and there was widespread corruption. It was a crisis situation. So there are no different thoughts about this particular statement. After some time, they talk about the objective of the white paper. So based on this third objective, which is the more informed debate, I would like to start this episode, which is basically to understand nitty-gritties of this white paper and unravel how things have changed in the last 10 years compared to the last 10 years before that. The one thing which I have a problem with this white paper, the politics aside, is that this is a white paper from a government. Okay, it is available on Department of Economic Affairs website. So this is a document from the government and it is not a document from the party. This is not the problem. The problem is the language. I don't know. I have not seen many white papers where one government is criticizing the other and that is introduced in the parliament. I don't know if it has happened before, then please enlighten me like how things were written, how things were framed or crafted. I would like to know that. But in this particular paper, first thing which kind of tricked me was it uses the term UPA government for the previous government, but it says our government for the NDA government. First of all, I don't know if writing something like this UPA government and our government instead of 16th Lok Sabha or the 14th Lok Sabha, something like that would have been more appropriate or not. I don't know. But because of this kind of language, it becomes a more political paper rather than a white paper. Second thing, if you understand the language in which it is written, it is full of vengeance, it is full of revenge. It is more like it is presented by a BJP rather than a government. It feels like the BJP is still in the opposition mode and it kind of gives a feeling that okay, the previous government just ended and you have just begin your government. No boss, 9 years have elapsed. You can talk about what things you have done more prominently rather than criticizing what they have done in the past. What are the highlights of this particular document? UPA government, in its quest to maintain high economic growth by any means after global financial crisis of 2008, severely undermined macroeconomic foundations. What happened after 2008 global financial crisis? Many countries around the world decided that okay, all the governments will start spending so that it will give boost to economy. Many countries started implementing different types of policies where some focused on consumption, some focused on investment, so on and so forth. The problem with the UPA government was that it focused a lot on consumption and that too farm loan waiver and pay commission hikes and other subsidies, which kind of worsened the macroeconomic foundations, which is true. And also, it did not contribute into a large scale growth in the country, which again is true to some extent. The next point it is talking about inflation. They are talking about how inflation was high in the second term of the UPA government. This is true, but we will talk about inflation after some time again. Then it talks about the bad debts in the banking system. It says that when there was Vajpayee government, NPAs were low, and when UPA government ended, the NPAs were higher, and again when basically the Modi government is there, NPAs are lower. This is also true. There is no doubt about the data that they have given. External vulnerability, there is a free fall in Indian rupee. See, this I think is not a very great chart, not a great thing in general, because if we see the value of INR to dollars, it has worsened. So this is not a correct way to represent it. There should have been a different chart, and they have talked about it after some pages, that the current account deficit was up. So there was twin deficit, which means that there was current account deficit also and there was fiscal deficit also, and both were at very higher levels. So that is true. And secondly is the foreign exchange reserves, which were depleting. So that point, they should have mentioned, they should have focused on that point instead of this particular INR USD chart. That's my feeling. This is a tip for someone who is analyzing economy. Foreign exchange reserves cannot be analyzed like this, that earlier this was the foreign exchange level, now it is this particular level. It is not correct one, because you need foreign exchange to meet some demands. And what are the demands? Usually whatever we import, the RBI should have enough foreign exchange. And that is what they are talking about in the second line. People might, just ignore that particular line. So that's why I'm just re-emphasizing that earlier this import cover was 17 months and then it came over to 6 months. So that is some problematic situation which they have highlighted. Next point, which is again a great point to highlight, is that forex reserves to external debt ratio. This is the kind of ratio one needs to see. Similar to imports, we need foreign exchange reserves to serve our debt. So how much of the debt can we serve through the current reserves? That is indirect way of explaining this particular ratio. It has worsened. The government had to plan the fiscal stimulus such that it will improve economic outcome, but that has not happened. That is what the government is telling in this particular part, and how that kind of led to more fiscal deficits. Higher fiscal deficits will mean higher public debt also. But here the government has not talked more about public debt, because currently public debt is higher than what it was in the UPA government. So they have kind of skipped that part. They have focused on fiscal deficit angle. Again, fiscal deficit was higher during both the crisis, which is basically 2008 2009. That financial crisis, India's fiscal deficit was very high. After COVID also, India's fiscal deficit increased. So both the governments had crisis in their terms, and both have increased fiscal deficits. I will come to all these things in a while when we discuss the Excel. Now they are talking about misplaced priorities. After 2008 financial crisis, the government should have spent a lot of money on capital expenditure rather than giving the farm loan waivers or increasing the subsidy. This was a kind of misplaced priorities they are talking about. And they are telling that the infrastructure could have been much better. Again, this is the statement that there was neglect of infrastructure creation and all those things. There is again a sort of myth busting in this particular point. Just wait till we reach the Excel sheet. The point number 21 is really good point, and health expenditure. So out of pocket expenditure, basically it is nothing but that the citizens have to pay a lot of money on their own when they are, getting into hospitals. There has been improvement in this particular thing, and they have also mentioned that in FY5 it was 69%, and then in I think FY14 it was 64%. So there has been improvement. It's not that there is complete neglect to health of people. That is not the case. And if I'm not wrong, this has now come down to I think less than 50, but I might have to check the data. But then there was environmental issues also. Basically what the government did was the ban on industrial development in coastal districts, and that was the reason where a lot of infrastructural projects got stuck due to regulatory issues. This government says that we have done better, we have balanced environment as well as development, which again I think is not very much correct, because it is just a theoretical exercise that politicians and governments do, that okay, they will write sustainable development on all those things, but I think it is hardly followed in the real sense. A lot of data is not available in terms of environment or sustainable development, so it is very hard to say that which government is more balanced in this particular case. Now, waste of public resources, which I agree, because if there is a lot of scams and corruption involved, the public resources will be wasted. Then they have just spoken about status of the all corruption cases. To my surprise, even after 10 years of this government, a lot of corruption cases are still under trial. So, like for example, coal block allocation, remaining case 14 cases have the have been convicted. Remaining cases are under trial. Commonwealth Games under trial. 2G scams cases are in the appellate court. Aircel Max's case under trial. Antrix Deva's case charge sheet has been filed. Land for Jobs case investigation is underway. And this also shows the inefficiency of courts, which obviously I'm not blaming any government. All governments are to be blamed equally. Everyone knows what kind of scams run, and obviously they need to be punished. If the culprits are not punished, then at least the party has been punished by the people. Now they talk about how they rescued the economy from despair. One thing we have to agree or appreciate is that the macroeconomic stability until FY19, because after COVID things went haywire again, but until FY19 things came under control, and that credit goes to this government. Couple of good things. One, which was that the fiscal deficit was coming down. Second, it focused a lot on capital expenditure, which means that they were spending more on, say, infrastructure. So that is something, the quality of expenditure was basically improving. Third thing they brought, good thing, was about the Aadhaar and Jandan and all those things, which kind of reduce the losses and it leakages from the system. One thing which this particular reform white paper, whatever it is, they have not talked about anything on demonetization. Do you believe it? The level of publicity the demonetization got,
क्या 2000 के इस नए नोट में कोई चिप भी लगी हुई है?
and how positive it is, how things have changed, digitalization has happened, and so on and so forth. But they have not written a single line, single word about demonetization. If you control F and find out demonetization, there is no such word in the entire document. It is in a way saying that the government is kind of accepted the fact that demonetization was not good for the country's development. We have seen a lot of problems after demonetization. So I found it very interesting that the government has kind of accepted that it is not in the positive. So they have not obviously mentioned what the negative things they have created, but at least they have not mentioned demonetization. Otherwise, I would have been very furious had they included it. And see, and in the black money context, they have just mentioned that we continue to undertake measures to unearth black money and to discourage recourse to it. They have not mentioned anything about any other policies that they have taken. Otherwise, you have seen paragraphs of each and every point, which we have not seen here. One thing which they have mentioned is that they have eliminated open defecation. See, I think this is not something you have to maybe credit. You can take credit of it because that happened in your regime, but it's not that you are responsible for it. Since independence, we have been working on it, and now after independence of 60 years, 70 years, we have become free from open defecation. So that is the success of all the governments till date. Then from fragile top 5 to top 5 in a decade, which is again true. India's banking system from sickness to health. This is again true in a way because IBC was introduced. There are problems with IBC, but at least in terms of the macro level, things have improved a lot. And later they talk about investor sentiments also, that how investors are now bullish on India. See, investors have been bullish on India forever. It's not that today they are bullish. Earlier also India was a bullish market only. Obviously there are ups and downs in the markets, and there are those cycles which every market has. Now here are the comparisons. See, I'm not against any government or against for any government in affordable housing 2003 to 2014 and 2016 to 2024. Is this comparison of the number of years correct or not? It is not. On annual basis these are like lesser number of years, and this is more number of years. So on annual basis obviously the outcome will be higher in the with the NDA government. Similarly, in case of affordable pension for unorganized sectors, this is the comparison for only 3 years, 2011 to 2014, 36 lakh beneficiaries. And this is the comparison of 8 years where they have got 6 crore beneficiaries. So you can find out different examples from this particular table. And yes, they have concluded that basically we are better and they were worse. So now let us talk about one more thing, which is basically the black paper that the Congress has released. The problem with the black paper first is that it is not available easily. So I opened from National Herald, the Congress newspaper only, and I have got from that. Even I cannot download the PDF because you have to pay on script or something like that. I don't know. So I'm just using this. So there are many economic as well as non-economic, social and political points, which I will not go through one by one, at least in this particular thing. Instead, what I will do is I'll open the Excel sheet and we will compare the economics part between UPA and NDA. The problem with the white paper was you would have seen that sometimes they would give reference to the Vajpayee government's time. Sometimes they will not give. So here what I have done is I've started the data from 2000 onwards. This will tell us that whether the UPA government has performed better than the previous government. Before 2000, there were a lot of political uncertainty, and it is better not to go into it, right? Also, there are data issues. Before 2000 का data मिलना बहुत मुश्किल है. So from 2000 onwards, we can get a lot of data. We can compare all the governments properly. There are 4 points. One is average, which is basically average for the 4 year or 5 year term. Then the CAGR. Then the minimum, maximum. Here it starts all the percentage terms for each year. And then lastly, these are the absolute values. The choice of indicator depends on one, what was used in white paper, and can I make a longer series of data. Thinking was from that angle. Is the data available for all those years? That is the second consideration. I'm not using something like कि consumer sentiment खराब हो रहा है नहीं हो रहा है, because consumer sentiment is very different kind of indicator. It is not the real indicator, because even if consumer sentiment का नंबर हमको खराब दिख रहा है, बट इकोनॉमी अच्छा होते हुए भी दिख सकता है, राइट? So that is the kind of indicator I have avoided. So here what we see is that on average India's economy grew until FY19. In the first NDA period, the average growth was sustained, but in the next NDA period, it was down. This is due to COVID, so there is no doubt about it. But here we can see that the track record has been fairly optimistic, fairly good. A lot of things have been due to the global scenarios that they are talking about. Later on, after 2008 financial crisis, world growth was stagnated, but our growth rate was sustained. In case of agriculture, industry and services, we can see that UPA government did a lot better job, at least in some of its terms, than the previous government, or at least they have not hampered the growth. Right now we cannot talk about, because a lot of things are in red because of COVID. Food inflation and energy inflation, this is where one of the comparison people make, that earlier inflation was high in UPA and now it is low, which is true, but a lot of things have been due to the global prices. If you can see here, the prices have increased by 20%, food prices, energy prices have increased by 10%. So that means a lot of things, and that's the reason India, maybe we have seen 9% inflation. After that it came down, but if you see, food prices have declined. It is negative 3%. Earlier it was positive 20%. Later it became negative 3%. Fiscal deficits have not been quite different. Average fiscal deficit has been around 4 and 5%. Now only it is 7%. Primary deficit. Why have included primary deficit? It is because the primary deficit will not include interest component. Whenever you want to judge a government's performance, it is not fiscal deficit, it is the primary deficit that you have to look, because in fiscal deficit interest hota hai. Interest component is of the public debt which is borrowed in the previous periods. So currently it is bad, 3%. Earlier it was good. Even the previous NDA government, the Vajpayee government, it was 1%. It was very good. Later on it brought it down. But in the second term of UPA, things went bit off. Later on, first NDA government again brought it back to normal. Now after COVID, it is not in a good shape. In CAGR terms also, you can see this, that earlier all the governments up to FY19, all the governments has brought the primary deficit down. It is negative. And in the last year, basically in the last section, we are seeing red. That is positive 59%. So it means that the primary deficit or the deficit management has been overall fairly good. Currently it is bad, and in around 2011 it was bad. But overall track record of almost all the governments have been good. Public debt again. When fiscal deficit increases, public debt also increases. But public debt has been reducing during the UPA government. Now it has increased. On inflation, obviously, current government has done a much better job. Also, one point to highlight is RBI's Monetary Policy Committee was also established during NDA government. So the credit also goes to RBI for effectively managing the liquidity and monetary things. Now the FDI. If we see what the level of FDI was during Vajpayee government and what it was during Manmohan Singh governments, you will see that there is a lot of difference. And the UPA government has done quite a good job in attracting foreign direct investments into India. CAGR, it shows that in the first term of the UPA government, FDI inflow improved significantly, 50% CAGR. It's huge. Later on, the growth is very stagnated. So even in the Modi government, we hear a lot that FDI is coming, FDI is coming, but the numbers don't show that much. So that is another problem with the media and with the things that government tell us. Nifty annual gains. I've told you earlier that markets were bullish on India for a lot of years now. Earlier also they were bullish. So you can see the Nifty gains. GFCF, the investment. All the governments have done a fairly good job, and we have improved from in the last 20 years. In terms of CAGR, we can see that again in the first term of UPA government, the GFCF improvement was quite higher than any other governments. Capital expenditure as a percentage of GDP. On average, we can see that it has improved during the second term of Modi government. And I have told earlier also, it is the commendable job that the government has done. And in the CAGR terms also, you can see that the government has done quite a good job. Infrastructure. Electricity consumption. If we go by the average growth, this is per capita electricity consumption, the average growth was very high during the UPA term rather than in the Modi term. Airways passenger growth. In the Vajpayee government and the first Manmohan Singh government, we have seen a lot of improvement, that people were coming out and flying through planes. That happened in that particular era. And similarly, you can see in the CAGR terms also. Coming to railways, in railways currently we are seeing a huge improvement in passenger kilometer, and but in the CAGR term, we have seen that in the first 15 years of this 21st century, we have seen a lot of improvement. Then in national highways, there is always a perception that the Manmohan Singh government was not well in implementing infrastructure projects, and that you can see that the first Modi government had a huge national highway construction thing, and in both average as well as CAGR terms, you can see that. And here, obviously, the government the present government is has to be applauded. Then tariffs. This is basically how much import duty on average we are levying, and basically the higher import duty is bad for the economy because we are putting a lot of pressure on our importers as well as exporters. So if the economy has to, open up to the world, you have to bring the tariffs down, and that we have brought down consistently. So earlier the tariffs were very high. Slowly and steadily we have brought it down, and this is again one particular party will not get the credit for it because 91 से ये शुरुआत हुई थी industrial policy of India. Slowly and steadily governments have brought all the tariffs down. So it is better that the current government is also doing it and not changing the course. So that is a very good sign. Trade as a percentage of GDP, this was very high during UPA government rather than the NDA government. Last points are these HDI, unemployment, and all those things, and we have seen improvement in the last during the Modi government. So people say that HDI improve nahi hota hai in a lot in during the Modi government, but on average we are seeing good improvement. Only the problem is with the last 2 3 years after COVID, where the HDI has fallen down, where the GDP per capita growth rate has also fallen down. So that's the overall analysis. So my point is, I am not interested in political things, only I am interested in bringing out true information. So just like white paper, there is another paper in EPW, which is very old paper that talks about UPA's achievements. There are some myths, there are some issues, there are some problems with those governments. What was that problem? And that particular paper will clear all your biases if you have any. Another important recommendation is Pooja Mehra's book on India's economy, which is The Lost Decade. It is absolutely number one recommendation to understand how Indian government's policies created one lost decade, which included maximum of Manmohan Singh government and a few years of Modi government also. Currently, there are some good points about the Modi government, but over the years, there has been a lot of negativity surrounding the UPA government. Obviously, the most important thing was the scams and corruptions and fiscal mismanagement in the last few years of their government. Going beyond narrative is something is at most important, and especially during the election year when things will become messy, nasty, and ugly. So it is very much important that we understand these nitty-gritties. But introduction of white paper tells us what things the previous government has done, what the current government is doing, and it kind of ignites a dialogue between people, between governments, between parties to talk about economics, and which is the most neglected aspect in the current politics. Currently, I'm not very much impressed by what they have put in the white paper because they have not talked about their own challenges, which are unemployment, which are inflation, and many more. We have discussed it in the last couple of episodes. Sometimes they have not chosen to write about anything. So, economics and data should go beyond the political ideologies and narratives. It shows some truth. Obviously, you can change and manipulate the data, you can show however you want. Similarly, that's the reason I have used average over here, CAGR, minimum, maximum, YOY, absolute values. Everything is on the table. So if anybody who wants this particular Excel, first I would say follow me on LinkedIn, go to the message section and put a hi and say that I want the UPA versus NDA economy Excel sheet. Then I will send it across to you. So before exiting or pausing this video, I would say that please subscribe to my channel and follow me across different social media platforms.